My name is Jay Rubin. I'm the Chief Executive Officer here at the Jewish Community Association of Austin. I want to welcome you to our third and final Hot Talk series of this summer. When we named this particular series, we really didn't realize how hot not only the talk was going to be, but the weather was going to be. And certainly we're breaking records. So thank you for all of you coming out, and we'll try to keep you cool while you're in here. This is the third program. The first program that we did dealt with the state budget. The second one with Austin City Council single-member districts. And tonight, of course, we're going to be talking about light rail. I want to, first of all, thank our partners in this program, which is, of course, the Austin American-Statesman and the Center for Politics and Government at the LBJ School of Public Affairs at the University of Texas. I also want to particularly thank someone who will be here shortly, who's really been the main force behind putting all of these things together this year, and member of our Jewish Community Relations Council, Sherry Greenberg. And she'll hopefully be here shortly, depending on MOPAC and various other things, which is a very good segue to the issue of light rail. We have been very glad that we've been able to utilize members of the Austin American-Statesman staff as our moderators for the programs, and I could think of obviously nobody better to moderate this discussion and introduce our panel than their resident expert on all things transportation, Ben Weir. Ben? Thank you.
Thank you. I could probably think of somebody better, but I guess I want to apologize, first of all, on behalf of the panelists for injecting more hot air into the summer. But we also hope to inject some light onto a very complex subject, and the topic is, of course, the city's $1.3 billion proposed urban rail system, which you can see a version of it back there. As you said, I'm Ben Weir, the transportation reporter for the Statesman and your moderator. With me are the panelists, urban rail supporters, John Langmore, who is a Capital Metro board member, and Austin City Council member Bill Spellman on the far right. On my left, the rail skeptics, if I may engage in perhaps some understatement, Jim Skaggs, who is a retired corporate executive, and former Travis County Commissioner Gerald Doherty. I'll tell you more about all of them in a minute. Our format tonight is as follows. First, I will clear my throat. After the introductions of each of these members, I'll give a brief outline of the particulars of the urban rail proposal as they're known at this point. And as you can see from the dotted lines on the map behind me and the shaded area across the lake, it's still a work in progress. The city is still deciding certain things. Then I'll give our panelists 5 minutes each to outline their positions and philosophy about urban rail. And after that, I'll be asking them questions on the subject for about 45 minutes or so. And then it will be your turn, and we'll take questions for the panelists from you for what I think is about another 45 minutes. And then I'll give each of them a final 2 minutes to say whatever they want to say on the subject. And then no matter what, I think we're going to try to wrap it up by 9 o'clock and get you out of here. So our panelist, Gerald Doherty. Whoops, Gerald Doherty. Sorry, John. You going to be okay? Aside from his 6 years representing Southwest Austin and Southwest Travis County on the Commissioner's Court, Gerald has many distinctions, including a particular knack for using colorful language. It's probably no coincidence that his initials are GD. But I have to mention two others. He played minor league baseball in the Boston Red Sox farm system after graduating from a Houston high school, which means he has stood in a batter's box while people threw 95-mile-per-hour fastballs near his head. And so no wonder he's such a tough political infighter. And he deserves credit for creating the strangest name for an advocacy group I've ever heard in my entire life, Reclaim Our Allocated Dollars. Pretty catchy. Of course, that name creates the acronym ROAD, ROAD, which explains it. Road was where the public first heard of Gerald. He also owned and ran the Pleasant Valley Sportsplex at that time. And that's where we came to know Jim in a different role than his corporate role. That group's primary focus was to get Capital Metro to reduce its 1% sales tax to a half cent, leaving the other half cent available to spend on roads. That never got done, but from that a political career was born. Gerald served as the Precinct 3 commissioner from 2002 to 2008, and he's now a restaurant owner and a business consultant. John Langmore, I'm going in alphabetical order, by the way. John Langmore is a consultant who works on transportation and land use. He graduated from UT School of Law and Graduate School of Business. Then he began his career as a corporate attorney in Washington, D.C. He then spent 11 years as an attorney for the Caterpillar Company before coming back to Austin. At that point, for a while there, he was Transportation Policy Director for State Representative Mike Kruse during the important 2003 legislative session when Kruse passed a sweeping transportation bill that gave TxDOT new authority to create toll roads. That's a hot topic for another summer. John was appointed to a reformed Capital Metro Board in January 2009 and has been 2010, good grief, I thought I was an expert, and has been a key part of that very active board's work over the past 20 months. Among the things that they've done, they hired a new president and CEO. They made changes to Capital Metro's paratransit operation. They raised fares to help restore what had been very depleted reserves for the agency. They got Metro Rail open and made some decisions later on to add some midday service, which essentially doubled the ridership. And now they're changing, at the legislature's behest, the agency's entire labor structure. Jim Skaggs was raised in Burnet, Texas, but he got away from Texas as fast as he could. He got his engineering degree at the University of Washington. And by age 30, he was an executive in NASA's lunar landing program, which I didn't know until about 2 years ago. After working in a series of corporate executive jobs for 2 decades after that, Jim became CEO and president of Tracor, which was Austin's first Fortune 500 industrial company and the granddaddy of our high-tech industry in Austin. He took over the company at a troubled time and led it through a highly successful turnaround and restructuring. He retired in 1998 after the company was sold, but he's been a very active retiree, as anyone who pays attention to transportation around here knows. He and Gerald have been dogged critics for almost 15 years of the local turn towards rail, first by Capital Metro in the form of Metro Rail and now the city's urban rail project. As I'm often urged to point out by rail supporters, he lives in unincorporated Travis County near Westlake Hills and thus cannot vote in Capital Metro or City of Austin elections. But he once bought a pair of pants at a Target store in Southwest Austin and paid sales tax to both entities. Bill Spellman must be a glutton for punishment. After serving as an Austin City Council member from 1997 to 2000 and leaving voluntarily, I've got that right? Okay. He got the itch again in 2009. He won that time as well, and he's currently on the council. He's been making hay recently by initiating a review of what it might cost for the city to suspend construction of water treatment plant number 4 near Lake Travis. I digress. Bill will come in first in at least 2 ways tonight. Number 1, academic credentials and height. A California native, he got a political science degree and later a doctorate in public policy from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, and he is 6'7". At the LBJ School of Public Affairs, he has a day job there at the LBJ Public School of Affairs teaching, and he's a nationally known expert on policing policy, and as executive director of the Texas Institute for Public Problem Solving, he helped to train 14,000 police officers and community residents in the practices of community policing. So, urban rail. I'll try to keep this as short as possible. Plans for building some sort of light rail or streetcar system in Austin have been rolling around since the 1970s and were a moving force behind the formation of Capital Metro in 1985. But in 2000, voters narrowly rejected the transit agency's $1.9 billion plan to build a 52-mile light rail system. So Capital Metro changed its approach, coming back to voters in 2004 with a $90 million 32-mile commuter rail plan on existing track. Voters said yes, and the line, now called Metro Rail, opened in March 2010. That was a couple of years late, and the cost to local taxpayers was at least double the initial estimates, and the line has about 1,800 boardings a day. Even before that line opened, however, Capital Metro was talking about building a light rail line in central Austin between the Miller neighborhood and downtown. In 2007, with Capital Metro increasingly strapped for money and carrying a poor reputation at that time, which John has helped change to some degree, Austin City Council members floated the idea of the city building light rail rather than Capital Metro, or perhaps a streetcar system. That moved from an idea to an official consensus over the next year or so, and that's what we're working on here. A word about terminology here. Commuter rail systems are generally longer rail lines with wider space stations and diesel-powered trains, and quite often they look like Amtrak equipment with locomotives and double-deck cars. What Metro Rail has instead, while is diesel-powered, it does have some fairly close space stations, and it doesn't look at all like Amtrak equipment. Now, what the city has in mind is light rail or streetcar, which would be electric-powered, not diesel-powered, and would likely have wires above the tracks in most places, if not the entire system, that would be attached to the cars through what are connectors called catenaries. The tracks would be embedded in city streets rather than being on separate right-of-way like most of the Capital Metro line is. And unlike Metro Rail, where almost all the line is single track, this would be double track so the cars could go in both directions and pass each other at any point in the system. The cost in today's dollars, the city says, is just under $1 billion, but based on when the actual building would occur in phases, they say the expenditure would be $1.3 billion. It would run from at the Miller neighborhood or near the Miller. There's a couple of versions of that. Through the University of Texas, the Capitol complex, downtown, cross the river somewhere. They haven't decided yet, although they've been talking about a line that would probably come from Trinity Street near the Four Seasons Hotel and get to the south side of the river near the Statesman, a new bridge. There's a whole lot we don't know yet. Exactly how the city would pay to build it, although federal funds would have to be a big chunk, what the first section would be, and where it would cross the river, as I said, who would operate the line, what it might cost year after year, and where that money would come from, and whether it will happen at all, of course. That will depend on a bond election, most likely to happen in November 2012, where the city would ask voters for $200 million or more for the first segment. Then, if voters said yes, they'd ask the federal government for at least that much in addition. Mayor Lee Leffingwell has said that even if voters here said yes, a no from the federal government would mean a no-go to the whole project. All of which brings us to tonight. The panel, we'd like to hear your thoughts about urban rail, and we're going to go, as before, in alphabetical order. Gerald, you have 5 minutes.
Ben, let us stand up here.
Sure.
I think the audience will enjoy having somebody up here versus trying to get around everybody's head and watching us as we speak. First of all, I would like to thank the organizations that helped pull this together, the Jewish Community Relations Council of Austin, the Center for Politics and Governance at the LBJ School, and the Austin American-Statesman. I'd also like to thank in particular Sherry Greenberg. Is Sherry here yet? Sherry? Sherry, thank you very much. Mary Lou Seraphin, is Mary Lou here? Mary Lou, thank you very much. And Ben, I really appreciate, everything that you've done. I also want to thank everybody for coming. Now, one little bit of information. Did y'all get the latest bit of information from Ben where we've actually had a change? Jim and I are going to do the side for support of the rail, and you all are going to. Did y'all get that?
I got it.
I thought that'd be a good spin here. I mean, because that would really be interesting, wouldn't it? It would. It'd be short. Again, thanks everybody for coming out. I'm sure that this subject matter, to all of you all in this, at least in this room, is something that is very critical. It certainly is critical to everybody in the community, even if you're not here, because truly, mobility and transportation is one of those elements that is probably the most life-changing thing that you can have. And whenever it comes to regards of quality of life, I mean, mobility and transportation, I think most of us would put at the top of a list. You know, in order to begin the evening's business, I think we need to start with at least one true and irrefutable fact. And I bet you this would be agreed on by all four of us, and that is that funding, as it relates to mobility, transportation, traffic, funding, you all, is the most important thing about all of this subject matter. Whether you're for roads, whether you're for rail, whether you're for hot air balloons, whether you're for skateboards, whatever, without funding, we will get nowhere. You know, something that I learned when I was a commissioner, when you start talking about funding, the average everyday person is pretty clueless about funding. And I want to go over just real briefly how the funding mechanism works, and especially as it relates to building our road system. TxDOT, as you all know, is the major road builder in the state. They don't build streets necessarily. They build our major road system. And they get their money from basically two sources. When you buy a gallon of gasoline, about 19 cents of it is a state tax, and that goes all to the state. Then there's another 19 cents that goes to the feds. And the feds then turn around and refund money back to the states. Now, something that's real interesting about this is that for every dollar that Texas sends to Washington, D.C., we get somewhere around 80 cents back. We are what you call a donor state. We've got a lot of people. We sell a lot of gallons of gasoline. We have to prop up. It's a little bit like the Robin Hood plan. We have to give money to states that don't have lots of population, but they have road systems, and they need those road systems. So if you take the combination of that 19 cents for the state and then effectively about 15 cents, 14 cents that you get back from the feds, it's that combination of dollars that you take, and you take on your major responsibility for building your road system throughout the state. Now, we have a real problem on our hands, folks, because the amount of dollars that is coming to the state, both from federal, we got what? 1 minute. I've only got 1 minute left? Whoa. Next time, I'll spend a little more time on that to tell you, just rest assured that our funding is upside down. Regardless of what we want to do in this community, we had better find a way, y'all, to get bang for buck. If you think that bang for the buck is spending $1.3 billion on a rail system, and by the way, you all need to know that the total transit of all the miles traveled in this city of public transit, it equates to 1%. 1% of the miles traveled is taken by public transit. Now, if we think that we're going to get somewhere with continuing to spend untold hundreds of millions of dollars on something where we're really talking about 1% of the people that use it, that is our major, at least my major complaint about whether or not we need to do this rail system.
You'll get more opportunities than that, Gerald.
Thank you very much.
John Langmore, to the panelists, when it gets down to 1 minute, I'll just take my glasses and put them right here.
Yeah, all right. I know what that means. I'd like to also thank everybody for coming out. It's a very important topic, and I'm always impressed with the number of people that take the time to, inform themselves about something as important as the future of the region. A couple things. Boondoggle versus Panacea, a rail system is neither, by the way. So, although it is a very catchy title for the event, let me start off with some facts and sort of walk you through how I've come to my support of rail in spite of the fact that I agreed with everything Gerald said about trouble with funding, and I've been a big advocate for increasing funding on both the road and the transit side. We need both. Austin is on the verge of reaching non-attainment on our air quality. When you reach non-attainment on air quality, every new transportation system you build has to go through a conformity analysis. And I can tell you, roadways have a tough time clearing a hurdle for not adding to pollutants in the air. Vehicle miles in Central Texas have increased in 8 of the last 10 years, 200% since 1980. Austin's population has basically doubled every 20 years since its formation. As of 2010, congestion cost Austinites $690 million a year. Of the cities that our Chamber of Commerce considers peers, and in essence the ones that we compete with, and all of the ones that we have visited on our past intercity trips, Denver, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Portland, Seattle, Phoenix, San Diego, Vancouver, and Charlotte this year, I've been on all those trips, all of them have a passenger rail system. There is not a single metropolitan planning organization in the state of Texas that is not advocating adding passenger rail as a means of dealing with congestion and giving commuters choices for the future of their region. Not one MPO that covers a city of 500,000 people or more, all of them, every last one of those experts is advocating implementing passenger rail. As a concerned citizen, as a transportation consultant, and as someone that's obligated to implement this and make a difference, let me tell you about, and that's on the Board of Capital Metro, let me tell you about my objectives for the region. I want to improve our air quality so we do not stay in non-attainment. We are almost certainly going to get there. Closely related, I want to maintain the health of our population. I want to reduce vehicle miles traveled, basically the amount of time we're spent in the distance that we're driving on roadways. That's cleaner air and water, and it's fewer vehicles on our very limited supply of roadways. I want to increase the safety of the traveling public. I want to reduce the loss to the economy due to congestion, and I want to sustain our growth of population and the economy while maintaining our quality of life. And that means I want to be able to grow where we don't consume all of our natural resources and all of our undeveloped land. I don't want to pollute Barton Springs to the point you can't use it. And I don't want to kill downtown by ensuring that every time there's a new development, it adds to congestion. And I want to create a more equitable society in Central Texas. Transportation has a role to play in every last one of these things I wish for our region. Now let me give you some more facts. According to TxDOT, passengers using rail are 21% more fuel efficient than using cars. That means better air quality, less reliance on foreign oil, and lower costs for citizens commuting. Rail cities that have a rail system, a meaningful rail system, have 36% lower per capita traffic deaths than cities without rail. And according to the US DOT, that saves $50 billion a year. A 2010 study by the University of Pennsylvania and the RAND Corporation found that building a light rail increases physical activity, walking, and reduces users' weights and obesity rates. Rail cities have 400% higher per capita transit ridership and in turn, 21% lower per capita vehicle mileage. Rail transit facilitates more sustainable development patterns. This is really important, and it's a tough thing to change. Mainly, denser development where you can walk to meet most of your needs. This reduces reliance on transportation, and it consumes less land, and it gives a lot of options to people as they get older and lose their ability to drive. Public transportation makes for a more equitable society in that more people have access to jobs and entertainment, and this reduces commuters' expense for such things as welfare and supportive housing. So you can achieve all of my objectives by increasing transit ridership, which rail does, and by creating more walkable and mixed-use communities. The difference between me and them, my opponents on this, and we've debated this for a long time, is that I also advocate for roadways. I want a balanced system. I am not trying to deny the public roadways the way they are trying to deny the public roadways. Let me finish with one real quick quote from, this is from Representative Micah, the chair of the Congressional Transportation Committee, who is a conservative Republican from Florida. Seeing the cost of one person in one car, and this is his advocacy for increasing commuter rail, the cost for construction, the cost for the environment, the cost for energy, you can pretty quickly be convinced that there's got to be a more cost-effective way. Commuter rail is the most cost-efficient means of public transportation. Thank you.
Representative Micah really does go on, doesn't he? Jim, you'll be next.
Good evening. Thank you for being here. You know, contrary to John's eloquent words, I totally disagree with most of what he just said. Why is rail a boondoggle? Well, the city's rail plan doesn't have a single positive attribute. There are many negative impacts to the community and citizens. The exorbitant cost and inefficient urban rail will divert precious, to Gerald's point, tax dollars from essential, high-priority transportation and other city services, resulting in, guess what? Increased taxes, degraded quality of life for all citizens, and disproportionate negative impacts on lower-income citizens. Talk about that later, we hope. To be sure, there's no misunderstanding of my views. I believe, in summary, that the city's proposal, there's overwhelming and convincing evidence, confirms that it has abandoned and ignored the following. Now, I'm going to read these. The proposed rail has no funding plan and is void of fiscal reality in terms of cost, operations, and funding sources. There's no knowledge of how to pay for it. The rail would cause long-term tax increases to the citizens, no doubt. Public transit has long-term declining trends in ridership, and I'll talk about that in a moment, as opposed to the increasing ridership John talked about. For 50 years, transit ridership has been declining. Congestion will increase downtown and throughout the city with this rail. Citizen safety hazards will increase. Social equity and justice will be significantly degraded. Urban rail will not increase development or tax revenues from development. City studies show that. Other essential city services and projects will be cut and or reduced. Visual pollution, wires overhead, poles, all of that will decrease the beauty of our capital city. Citizens will have a reduced desirability for downtown, and I believe less will go downtown. So rail is not cost effective. In fact, it's the least cost effective transit system in the world. The rail that we have now from Cap Metro delivered to us, every single rider is subsidized by taxpayers, most of you, $20,000 a year to ride that rail. I could buy them a new car every year and give them gas money, and it would be cheaper than riding that rail. So it is not cost effective. And anything that is not cost effective, that's paid for by taxpayers, is not sustainable. I think we're witnessing that all over the country today. And it's true here in Austin, Texas, even though we're in better shape than most. So national public transit ridership has been reducing since World War II. Since the first census recorded in 1960, it was 12% of the work trips were on transit. Today, that number is less than 5% and going down every year. In Austin, Texas, we are at less than 4% of the people that use public transit for the work trip. Now, as Gerald mentioned, only 1% of the passenger miles traveled in the region are on transit. 99% are not on transit. The Texas transit ridership in the three major areas, Dallas, Houston, and Austin, have all declined. There's less transit ridership today than there was a dozen years ago. After spending billions of dollars primarily on rail and promoting public transit, the public is not riding public transit more. San Antonio, with no rail, has the most cost-effective transit system in the major cities. It costs less per passenger, and thank you. And it has actually increased 1.6% in ridership, while its population, though, has gone up 25%. So all four of those Texas cities are among the top 20 fastest growing cities in this nation, and their transit ridership is overall down. So why are we spending billions of dollars to try and convince people to ride transit when we have a history showing that that is not the choice they make, and for very good reasons, which we'll talk about tonight, I'm sure. But basically, many things prevent people from wanting to ride transit. Work journey is one of them. The fastest growing journey to work today is working at home. Working at home has exceeded the use of public transit in almost every city. In fact, it has in the nation as a whole. If you remove New York from that equation, all the rest of the cities in the nation have more people working at home than riding public transit. Think about that. That's why a lot of people aren't riding public transit. They're working at home. And change of work locations. Only 10% of work are in central cities today. It used to be 60, 70, 80%. Now 10%. So people are not going downtown to work. They're going suburb living to suburb jobs, and transit doesn't meet that market requirement. Thank you.
Bill?
Show off that 6'7". One of the first things I learned when I moved to Texas was the phrase many of you may have heard: "You're not you're not from around here, are you?" I just want to take a quick straw poll. How many of you were born somewhere other than Austin, Texas? Oh, I feel so at home. I was born in Los Angeles. The first 20 years of my life in Los Angeles. Some of you, yes. I was born in Van Nuys, which is a district of Los Angeles. It's a neighborhood in San Fernando Valley. And like all people who are born and bred in L.A., I grew up in a car. I spent most of my time thinking the way you get from point A to point B was in a car, in the back seat, fidgety, wishing we'd get to asking my father, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" When I was 16 years old, we made our little ritual troop like all 16-year-olds in Los Angeles do, down to the California version of DPS to get a driver's license, and started figuring out how to drive, because the only way I was able to get where I wanted to go from where I was like everybody else in Los Angeles, in a car. That went on for 4 years. I went to UCLA, and after I graduated, I got an opportunity to go to Boston to go to school. And I'm thinking, how am I going to get around Boston? I'm going to have to buy a car and figure out where to park, and I was not sure what to do with myself. And then I went to Boston, actually looked around and realized, well, maybe I can put off this whole car thing for a while. Maybe I don't really need one right away. And it turns out in 4 years in Boston, I never drove a car. Once I rented a car in order to move into a new apartment. I never needed to buy one, and it was the easiest way to get around Boston is on the train. It's more comfortable, it's more convenient, it's faster, and it's cheaper. That's the way people get around Boston. Well, I graduated. Actually, I didn't graduate, but that's another story we don't need to get into. And I went to Washington, D.C. Eventually, I did. Went to Washington, D.C. to take a job working for National Association of Big City Police Chiefs. Say that quickly 3 times. And in Washington, I was pretty sure I was probably going to need a car. One of the first things I did when I got to D.C. was buy one. One of the second things I learned when I got there was that nobody actually drives to work in D.C. if you want to get there at a reasonable hour in a reliable way. What everybody does is they take some combination of bus and train, or walk if you're lucky enough to be able to afford an apartment close by. And I started taking the bus and the train, and then I moved, and I was able to take the train. And in 7 years, that's approximately 1,500 journeys to work, I drove into work exactly once. And that one trip, I had no choice but to take in a car. It's a long story. Was the least comfortable, least convenient, slowest, and most expensive journey to work in my entire 7 years in Washington, D.C. You don't need a car to get around most of the places in Washington, D.C. And I'll have a lot more to say about Washington, D.C. as we talk further about the benefits and presumed costs of rail. But some of you, I think, have had a similar situation as I've had. Maybe you grew up in a place where you had to drive in order to get around. Maybe you've lived in a place where there were alternatives available, When I moved to Austin, Texas, I was pretty sure I wasn't going to be able to take a train to work. That turned out to be true. I bought a car, and I've been driving around ever since. For the last 23 years, this is my primary means of getting around, as it is for the vast majority of us, because it's what you do in Austin, Texas. But we don't have to be that way. It is evident that Austin, Texas, whether we like it or not, I have mixed feelings about this myself, but whether we like it or not, Austin, Texas is going to get bigger, it's going to get denser, and it is going to be, for better or worse, one of the great cities of the North American continent. I don't think we have much choice about that, so I think we ought to make the best of it and make the best quality of life we can in this city, which, for better or worse, continues to attract more and more people. As John said, it's doubled in size every year since the Civil War. Boy, I feel uncomfortable saying that, but it seems to be true. So here we are, doubling in size.
About 1 minute.
Thank you. I knew you were going to do that. I think we have to figure out what kind of city we want to be when we grow up. We can continue to be a city going down the track we have been going down, like the Los Angeles of my youth, where we drive everywhere we go, coughing, wiping our eyes because of the smog, and trying to peer through all that smog to figure out where we're going. Or we can take an alternative route and do what Boston and Washington, D.C., and New York, and the suburbs of New Jersey, and Chicago, and Portland, and Seattle, and Denver, and Phoenix, and a whole bunch of other cities have started to do, including Dallas and Houston, and even Round Rock. There's a whole bunch of places out there that are considering turning the corner and not going in the same direction Los Angeles went in, including, in fact, Los Angeles. So I think we can head this off a little bit and go down that alternative path just a little bit earlier than we thought. But we have to decide what kind of city we want to be when we grow up and how we want our kids and our grandkids to get around, whether we want to have them to have a choice or whether we want to funnel them into the same choices that I had at the age of 16 and 18 and 20, having no choice but to drive to get wherever we want to go. We'll have a lot more to say about the costs and the benefits of that, but I want us to have a choice, and I want us to go down a different direction.
Thank you. Oh, well. The way we're going to do this now, I'm going to ask a few questions, and in each case, I'm essentially going to allow one person from this side to talk, or this side first. It'll vary, and then allow another person from the other side, if they wish to respond. Let's just vow not to filibuster. You know, let's try to keep it at least relatively contained to the actual question, so that we can have a series of questions rather than just 4 or 5 before our time runs out. So the first question is for the supporters, and to some degree, these questions were written before I knew what you guys were going to say for the last 20 minutes. So some of it, the questions will sound like they will elicit repetitive answers, but I assume you'd like more opportunity to perhaps make the same points or related points. So for supporters, what problem is it that Austin has now or will have in the future, near or long term, that urban rail is intended to solve? And let's just speak from the table now.
I think the problems are obviously, those that I listed, non-attainment on air quality, a lot of negative implications to achieving non-attainment, increasing vehicle miles traveled, increasing sprawl, which is non-sustainable. Part of the reason that we can't afford the road network that Gerald complained about and that I have a problem with as well is not just the money, it's our development patterns. And as we simply cannot afford the roads to support sprawling development, it is too expensive. So it'll do that. It also, all of the things, the health, what it does is support change in land use patterns. And there's no question that when you have a limited access system like a rail system, everyone gets on and off at a limited number of spots. The value of the spots where they get on and off increases dramatically. So what it does is create a completely new set of development around that. And I think we will probably see within a year new mixed-use, dense, walkable communities developed on the Red Line. Within the next year, we'll see more of that. Rails, you have to have a limited access system to promote that style of development. It's critical that we turn the tide on our sprawling development. We will not maintain our quality of life if we don't start to do things differently. And then lastly, you got to give people a choice. You have to offer people some alternative to getting in their car for every single need that they have to meet. Bill,
Jim or Gerald, do you want to respond? You don't have to. Can you hear him? Is the mic on?
Can you hear me now? Non-attainment is a boogeyman that's been thrown out by organizations and people for a long, long time, ever since I've been in Austin. And I've written much about that, not quite as much as transportation, but a lot. And we are not in a disaster on non-attainment. We are one of the cleanest major cities in this nation. We have never exceeded the attainment standards set by the United States government. And we are not on the precipice ready to fall off at any time. On the other hand, Houston and Dallas have exceeded those standards. It has not constrained them from building all the roads they can possibly build and have better transportation than we have. And trains didn't make the difference. In fact, all the money you could spend on trains, if you spent it on ways to solve the air pollution issue, if you will, you'd make better progress by spending it on other ways to do it. Secondly, we are not increasing in VMT per capita. We have been declining in VMT per capita in this area, in this region, for 15 years, 20 years. And so, vehicle miles traveled per person. Vehicle miles traveled per person. You can look at any of the valid statistics, the legal statistics on this. We are not increasing, as John said. We are decreasing and have been decreasing for many, many years. Thirdly, this city has not doubled every 20 years since the Civil War. Look at the statistics. If you look at Dallas, Dallas doubled every 20 years for about the same period that Austin did. But when it got to a size that Austin is or was recently, it stopped doubling every 20 years and started growing at a much flatter rate. I don't know what the future is for the growth of Austin, but to throw out the boogeyman that we're going to double every 20 years and therefore we got to spend billions of dollars on a train in the expectation of doubling is just fallacious.
Thanks, Jim. One of the big unanswered questions about urban rail has been what entity, using what money, would pay for the $20 million or more annual operating costs that would come once the system opens. Of course, the system will open at a certain size, and it'll have a certain number of trains running a certain number of times. As the system grows, were it to grow into a second phase and third phase, the operating cost would, of course, get larger. But the number that's been thrown out by the city, and it's still subject to refinement, is $20 million a year. Lying beneath that question is the idea that if the city of Austin were to have to pay for operating costs, then that would be money that couldn't be used on other existing city services and needs. So I'd like to hear from any of you a feasible plan for how the operating cost of such a system might be covered.
You can't. How fast is that?
No, that's
You can't unless you are willing to tax people into oblivion. You know, that's a great question. And I personally am so tired of people expecting me and a lot of people in this community to really not understand what you won't get if this thing is put into place. 62% of the people that voted in 2004 voted for the red line. They were told that they were going to have 3,000 boardings. Now, folks, 3,000 boardings is 1,500 people. They said that that's what they were going to have. Now they are crying over the fact that you barely are into the 15, 16, 1700s. If you take 15, 16, 1700, if you take 700 to 900 people a day, There are 430,000 commuters on a daily basis in this community. That's less than 1/2 of 1%.
Remember the
And this
question.
community spent $150 million. We were told that the system was going to take $2 to $3 million to operate on a yearly basis. It is now north of $12 million. Now, if that, you can give me the panacea all you want, and you can tell me about we've got to be a great city and all these other places that do it, but let me tell you what, the other places that do it are just as upside down. It is not economically sound and feasible to go down this path. If you had people crawling out of the train cars, then you might get Jim Skaggs and Gerald Daugherty to have a press conference and say, my God, I didn't think that would ever happen. That's not happening. It's nowhere near. So let's get real with what is happening. We've got something on the ground that proves what we have.
Thanks, Gerald. Response?
Yeah, boy, several things. I did not say vehicle miles traveled per capita was increasing. I said vehicle miles traveled. The population has doubled every 20 years since its formation. I looked at those statistics today, as a matter of fact, and it's 20% in the last decade. You know, I have to resist the temptation to say that you can have your own opinions, you can't have your own facts. But on the formation of an entity to operate it and how you'll pay for it, it is unresolved. We are trying to figure that out as we sit here. I think largely it's between the city and Capital Metro. It's absolutely a valid question. I can assure you I would not vote for something if we don't know how we're going to pay for it and how it's going to be operated. What we are contemplating is maybe some type of a joint agreement between the City of Austin and Capital Metro to operate it. There is no revenue stream that exists today to pay for the operation. It's not $20 million a year, is pretty much for the whole system. The first phase is probably, you know, and again, they need to finalize these estimates, is around $10 million a year. There's no existing revenue stream to pay for that. There are some viable options, and in my opinion, what we ought to do is put them on the ballot at the same time as the rail, so that people can say, here's what you get and here's how you pay for it. One of them, for instance, is a vehicle emissions tax that you can put on vehicles, that you could take that revenue stream, and it depends on how large of an area that you draw from, but it would generate about $8 million a year, most likely. I think that's a viable candidate for that. And, you know, there's one thing, I'm a big proponent of roadways, by the way. But I have to admit that I get a little incensed at the harsh analysis that they apply to rail and do not apply to roadways. How many of y'all in here commute on State Highway 130? Oh, okay. That is a $1.3 billion project. And that was subsidized to the tune of 50% above and beyond the tolls. Do you realize how many of y'all voted for Proposition 12? Talking about subsidies, voted for Proposition 12. Proposition 12, by the way, it's horrible policy. What that authorized the state to do is to take $5 billion from general revenue, nothing related to transportation, and put that into the transportation system. They just authorized borrowing another $3 billion this session. That is bad policy. Roadways do not pay for themselves. If you apply all of their analysis to roadways, you'd never build another roadway. What you have to think about is your vision for the region. What do you want to look like in the future? I want them to name the city that doesn't have rail that is their model. Every city that we visited in the Chamber of Commerce as a model for us to emulate has a rail system, and leader after leader will march before the Chamber of Commerce and say how important it was to their quality of life and their mobility to have that rail system in place.
Well, actually, John, my next question sort of gets at it, and it's for them. Supporters of passenger rail look at a maturing central city, and they say that the streets in the central part of Austin and the highways are about as wide and about as numerous as they're going to be able to be. They say a more dense city with greater metro-wide population will inevitably need ways to move larger amounts of people on thin corridors, and that rail will do that. So best to start now, they say, rather than waiting until the lifeboat is like half full of water. What do you say to that?
Well, the first is that putting rail on the same capacity streets that you just said are now at capacity will simply increase congestion. You can't add a rail on the same lanes with cars without adding congestion, because there'll be less car capacity and therefore fewer cars downtown, and therefore, and think of a trip. You go from your home down to a parking lot or a parking structure somewhere south of the river, and you park your car and you get out and you ride a rail into downtown Austin to do your business or to go to the theater or to a restaurant. And I would ask in this room, how many of you would do that, how many times? Where you have to go park your car in a structure, ride into downtown for a few blocks, and when you finish, get a rail and ride back out of downtown. Rail is not high capacity. That is a misnomer which has been used forever. Rail is not high capacity. You can do much more with buses. You can have much greater movement of people with buses than you can with rail. 1/10 the cost. Fort Worth just made the decision to stop studying rail for the simple two reasons. They said we can do it with buses for 1/10 the cost, and we can have flexibility for future growth patterns which we cannot determine today. Austin is an adolescent city. It doesn't know what its growth is going to be in the future, and when you put rail, fixed rail, on the streets, it cannot be moved without a lot of money.
Bill?
One of the things that they teach you in candidate school is that if somebody asks a question you don't want to answer, ignore the question and answer the question you wish they had asked instead. And I think Mr. Skaggs just did that. Let me return to Mr. Ware's question. If you're trying to add capacity to our downtown streets, how many 30-story buildings are you prepared to tear up in order to add lanes to those streets? If you want to add capacity to I-35, how many neighborhoods are you prepared to tear up in order to add lanes to I-35? Ditto Mopac, ditto 183, ditto Ben White 290. There's a limit to how far we can go. There's a limit to how big those highways can get. And for most of us, those highways are built out just about as far as they can go. If we're going to add capacity to the system, we're going to have to do that, because regardless of whether we're doubling in 20 years or we're doubling in 40, we're going to get bigger. More people are coming into town. If the only way for them to get around is on a car, we won't have any place else to put them. But if we give them an alternative, if we have a train system which will actually move people from point A to point B, we will be able to add a lot of capacity. We will be able to move those people around and take some of the load off of what would otherwise be a tremendously overburdened road system.
You know, one of the problems about this, when he talked about moving people from point A to point B, people look at this system here and they say point A is essentially the Miller neighborhood, 3 or 4 miles from downtown, and point A1, I guess, would be the Riverside corridor to the east. The question is, I think for a lot of people, is $1.3 billion a proper investment for those point A's and point B being downtown, when the congestion right now seems to be mostly a Mopac, I-35, 183 kind of problem?
Sure. That's a fair question. What we're talking about here is probably a premature debate. As John mentioned a few minutes ago, we're not sure how we're going to pay for maintenance of the system. We're not sure who's going to operate the system. There's a lot of unanswered questions. We're not sure how we're going to cross the river yet. We're working off of Sherry Greenberg and Ben Ware's schedule, not off of the City of Austin's schedule, and some of these things haven't been worked out yet. On the other hand, nobody's going to ask you to vote on something that hasn't been worked out yet. We're nowhere near November 2012, and as we get closer to November 2012, we will have worked that stuff out, and when we are ready to go before you and ask for your decision as to what we should and shouldn't do, we'll have a way of paying for this, we'll have a way of operating this, and we'll know exactly where we're going to cross the river.
Before you guys respond, let John add to it, and then I'll give you plenty of time.
It wasn't quite done yet, but that's okay.
Oh, well, go ahead.
Well, first of all, when people say they don't have the answers, if we don't have the answers, we're not going to put it before the people. That's hogwash. They'll give you whatever answer they think that needs to happen in order to get you to pass something. That has happened time and time and time again. Now, I'm not saying that that these guys are sitting here lying to all of us about, that whatever is told will be lies. But Ben, let's go back. I wanted to address something else about the downtown mobility and talking about the density. Mobility downtown, we're trying to get 25,000 people downtown. Nothing wrong with 25,000 people. If you want to go down there and live in 890 square feet for $800,000, get after it, baby. Get after it and pay your POA dues. I mean, quite frankly, however many, I don't know how many people can do that, but if we can put 25,000 people, fine. But if you put 25,000 people downtown, rail is not the most effective way to get people around downtown. Walking will be the most effective way. If you go to New York City, I mean, walking is how you get around. We had, for 16 years, a Dillo system here. We had a Dillo system that was free. You understand? It was free. You could take an Uzi in there, and if you didn't shoot the driver, you wouldn't have hurt a person. I mean, that's what kind of a system we have had. We continue to throw these things up to this community, and I am surprised that people are as clueless as they are. But they will go and vote for things because they want something to work. Y'all, all of us want something. I mean, heck, I want something to work. I mean, but I'm willing to stand up and say, if it doesn't make any sense, then by God, somebody needs to say it doesn't make any sense. And let's concentrate and let's put our money on things that we know will work. Maybe at some point in time, rail will be an opportunity for this community that we need to look at. But it is certainly not right now, in my opinion.
These papers you were walking in from our friends of the Alliance for Public Transportation, this is not just the urban rail system that I guess we're debating here now. That's the small section in the center, which is in gold. But this is a proposed version of the entire system. Now, the entire system is going to take a long time to build out. We have a lot of unanswered questions about the whole system. On the other hand, this is a reasonable proposal for things that we could do over the next 20 years. It took a long time to build out the, I can't remember what the interstate highway system was originally called in 1954 when President Eisenhower suggested it, but it had something to do with the National Defense Highway System. When it was first proposed in 1954, it wasn't built. It took a long, long time to build it, and we're still building it in a lot of communities all over the country 50 years and more later. It's going to take us a while to build this thing, too. And all we're talking about here, the substance of this particular debate, is one small piece of that system. If you looked at that one small piece of that system and said, well, how effective is that one little piece of it going to be? Probably that one piece all by itself isn't going to be all that effective. On the other hand, you could say the same thing about building I-35 between 45th Street and the river. That's a small piece of the system. It's not particularly effective all by itself either. It's only effective when you link it to other roads going in other directions and north and south from there. I-35 is a useful road because it goes all the way from Duluth to Laredo and the border. That's the value of the whole thing is because it's connected to everything else. And what we're talking about is a small piece of a much larger system and a major change in direction for the city. Do we want to continue to go in the direction where our total system is based only on driving around, or whether we want to turn the corner and supplement that driving system with something where we're involved in rail to get around as well?
Your turn if you want it, otherwise we'll move on. The $1.3 billion for the full 16.5-mile system would depend for about 50% of its cost, the mayor and the city transportation department say, on qualifying for and getting what are called small starts, new starts, federal transit grants. Nonetheless, federal grants. Cities all over the country are applying for this money as well, and many are well along in their systems and are getting money to continue building out the systems they had, as Bill was referring to. Meanwhile, Republicans in the U.S. House, who control the House, have been talking about zeroing out new starts. Now, admittedly, they don't control the Senate, and nobody controls anything forever. Given all that, how realistic is it to think that Austin will actually get what would amount to, in the long run, $650 million or so from the federal government?
I can touch on that. Ben, we don't know. You know, it's a tough call to decide how you play that one. Do you build your first leg and have the money that you spend count towards future federal money that isn't coming in yet, that hadn't come in yet? Or do you just, what the mayor's proposed is authorize it and then go out and seek the federal funds and only spend what we've authorized if we get the matching federal funds? It can be a very long process to get federal funds. So being someone that wants rail implemented, you know, I have to admit that I struggle with that notion, although I also accept the merits of that, because there is no question that we cannot, on the back of property taxes, build out the full system. And no system around the country has been built out without federal support. Where is it going? You know, none of us know. I mean, we don't know where it's going on the road side either, by the way. So we're in a very tough time in that regard, and I don't know which is the right way to go. I sort of struggle, but I think it's you know, arguably a very responsible approach to say that we will authorize the money. We won't issue the debt until we know that the federal funds to match it are going to be you know, come into the city of Austin. I do think, however, that, you know, based on all the characteristics by which they evaluate transit projects, that we would stack up extremely well across the country. But it's all wrapped up in federal funding of transportation, which relates to a lot of things and which is definitely in a bit of turmoil right now. So,
Okay. Ben, why would you ask the federal government to give you $650 million for something like this?
I personally have not, have no such intention, but anyway, yeah.
I mean, especially, it's probably the wrong time to ask us all, because, you know, good God, I mean, we all get up every day, we're shell-shocked about what's going on. Why would we ask the federal government to give us $650 million? I mean, I guess it's like, I mean, honey, go down there and buy me 6 more shirts because they're on sale. I mean, I don't need 6 shirts. Well, they're on sale, so go down there and get them. I mean, what are we thinking here? I mean, the question is, do we have something here that's worth asking? I mean, why we would be asking for those dollars if it makes sense? I mean, heck, I'd go and ask. I mean, I'd call the representatives of whoever I do that we might be, that we could influence. But by God, I mean, you've got to be asking a question that is logical in everyone's mind, and until you can shore up, until you can, I think, show people why this thing is an effective use of money, then you shouldn't be going and asking the feds for $10. Then, just a quick,
Well, just a quick,
Tell you what, why don't you, well,
contrary to previous comments, many roads pay for themselves, and on average, hello, many roads pay for themselves, and on average, all roads pay for themselves. There's not a single train or transit system in this nation that pays for itself. Can you hear me? There's not a single train in this nation that is paid for a train or a transit system. They are all paid for by taxpayers. Not users, taxpayers. And that's exactly what will happen in this case. It will be paid for by the taxpayers for a very minuscule number of people to have a joyride from time to time. Now, the question is, what societal benefit do we get from that? All of this talk about making all these benefits is not proven in any city in this nation. There's been no city that's achieved all those lofty goals that John outlined, and it cannot happen in this city. This city is no different than all the others. Right now, all of the rail cities that have been mentioned, and yes, I went to most of those trips also, are in deep financial trouble. They're canceling future rail plans. They're stretching out construction. They are in dire need of more money, and they're looking for ways to tax people to get more money. Because you cannot sustain yourself with systems that don't pay for them.
let me just real quickly make a point. Him saying roads pay for themselves, is contrary to what the Texas Department of Transportation says, and we put in $500 million of property taxes into State Highway 130. And by the way, Pete Winstead is the guy that put together State Highway 130. I would have supported it 100%, but I'm just drawing the distinction between how they want to burden, how they describe rail relative to their unwillingness to apply that same analysis to roadways. And right now, TxDOT is having to subsidize State Highway 130 by 70% more than what they originally forecasted. Now, I will acknowledge the same thing applies to the road as it does to the rail, by the way, which is the fact that vehicle miles traveled have declined because we're in a huge economic recession, the same way that transit trips have also declined since 2008. And that's in large part accounted for the subsidy. But TxDOT has, from day one, had agreed to put in $700 million to subsidize State Highway 130 above and beyond the tolls, which would be users paying for it directly. So that statement is absolutely incorrect.
And toll road 183A is more than paying for itself every day.
Okay, I have two more, one for them and one for them before we move on to your questions. To John and Bill, what is it overall that opponents of rail just don't get?
Where do I start? I could give you a long laundry list, but let me give you the number one with a bullet biggest issue that I've got. When they're always talking about subsidies and how we are not subsidizing the road system, roads are paying for themselves, and there's not a single train system in the country that pays for itself. On a very limited basis, that's absolutely accurate, I suspect. But I would like to know, how are you going to operate New York City without the subway? How are you going to operate Chicago without the MTA? How are you going to operate Boston without the MBTA? How are you going to operate many of our big cities without a train system? I don't think it can be done, and I know sure as heck what happens in Washington, D.C. when the trains stop running, because it's happened a couple of times because of power outages, and the place completely shuts down, and nobody goes to work, and nothing can happen, because the surface transportation system, the road system, is simply not sufficient to be able to handle all the people that get to work. It just can't work. And we're heading in the same direction of being a city like Los Angeles that just doesn't work, because if the only way you can get around is on a very limited capacity highway system, you won't be able to get people where they want to go. We need another way of getting people who want to go, and I want to see what Jim Skaggs says to the question of how do you operate New York without a train?
Let me add a couple.
Wait.
I'm sorry.
We want to give the audience some time too. So.
Austin will never be New York, Chicago, San Francisco, or any of those cities.
All right. Jim and Gerald. And maybe that thing, let's use the hand mic there. Can you foresee a time when passenger rail would make sense in Austin, when either one or both of you would vote for such a thing?
I would vote for it if it is cost effective. That means that, yes, transit needs to be subsidized. I understand that. I support transit. How many in this room have ridden rail every day to work and back home? Okay, not very many. But I'm one of those, and I did it in New York City. How many have ridden the bus regularly? A little more. I've done that. And so I'm not talking about taking a position from a position of no knowledge. I have knowledge of writing these systems. I know when they work and when they don't work. So, you know, it just doesn't make sense. You got to have a system that is cost effective to be sustainable. Taxpayers, particularly when you're talking transit, carrying 1% of the people. Now, 100% of the taxpayers are paying for it, but 1% are using it. That's not true of roads. 100% of taxpayers may be subsidizing part of it, but a huge percentage of the people are using it. 99% of the passenger miles traveled in the Austin, Texas region are on the roads. It's simple deduction to me to say the way you improve mobility is you improve the roads. And that's not just a car driver speaking, that is for transit users. If transit users can get where they need to get in a more rapid time, from neighborhood to neighborhood, from suburb to suburb, not just from someplace out to downtown, then we will have a transit system which makes sense to serve the community. But that can be a bus system which is very cost effective with rapid bus and all the current technology that we can use. And it's been proven over and over again. In LA, where they put them side by side, a train and a rapid transit, the rapid transit is more effective. So the bus, the train system has this allure as if people have taken something, that they think that this is magical. And there's not a city in this country that proves it to be magical. They've all proven it to be a drain, a sump pump. It takes money away from projects that make sense, and it makes a mockery of social equity and social justice.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks. For the audience questions, Adam, we only have one of these mics for the audience questions. I guess we have two options. They could stand up here, and then we could use that for the audience, or I will repeat the audience questions. Well, okay. Tell you what, you guys get to stand. So I'm going to attempt to try to have the questions be balanced. I'm not quite sure how to do that. But first person, this man right now.
Hi, my name's Ed Burke. I'd like to address this. Ed Burke, I'd like to address this to Bill Spellman. If I grant you that non-attainment is a problem I'm trying to solve, not enough, and the other one is congestion. When you have the voting next November, will you have an either or? One is looking at a bus system with liquefied natural gas versus your train system. Will that be on the ballot, and will we be able to look at that cost-benefit analysis?
Probably not, and the reason it probably won't be, it might be, is because I suspect what you're looking for from your elected representatives in the city of Austin is to do a lot of the thought that you would do if you were in our shoes. If we come to a situation where we don't know which of these two is going to be better, or we can come up with arguments in favor of bus rapid transit and in favor of trains, we might give you a choice. But I think what you were asking us to do is to look at all the same information that you would have available for you if you were making the decision, and decide which of these two alternatives to a roads-only network is going to be the most cost-effective, which one is going to attract the most riders, which one is going to solve our problem most effectively.
Well, the thing I'm picking up on is Mr. Skaggs here said that you can put in a bus system to move the same amount of people at 10% of the cost of a rail.
Yeah.
And from just looking at it, and I'm an ex-engineer, that makes a lot of sense to me. So that's why I asked that the city council is going to spend, or ask the taxpayers to support, that you look at, we have available the data for a cost-benefit analysis on both propositions.
Thank you, sir. Bill, can I say one thing first? Let's try so that we can get as many questions into, and I'm not criticizing you, sir. Let's refrain from making a speech and then maybe asking a question. Let's just ask questions.
If I could add just a little bit to my answer.
Sure, go ahead.
Capital Metro is mounting a bus rapid transit system on North Lamar now, and we'll have the benefit of operations before we have to go to a vote in November 2012. So we may learn something from the BRT system that they're actually going to implement in the next year or so. More generally, I'm going to look at BRT very seriously. My good friend Steve Bayer has been arguing in favor of bus rapid transit as an alternative to rail for years. When we were last debating light rail, Steve and I got into it with Jim Skaggs in the room, and I was not persuaded yet by his argument that BRT was going to be better than rail, but I was persuaded it was worth a look, and I definitely want to take a look at it.
Okay. Go ahead, Linda.
Hi, is this on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm Linda Curtis. I'm with ChangeAustin.org, and for years I've been fighting the road warriors there. But I have to say, as somebody who really likes rail and rode it for years in New York, I'm very skeptical about this, and I have two questions, one for Mr. Langmore and one for Councilman Spellman. And for Mr. Langmore, my question is, you said that you were talking about all the cities that had rail. Can you name a city that put rail on top of a lousy bus system, which is what the gentleman here was referring to? And then for Councilman Spellman, I have a question about the upcoming city budget, since you're going to be voting on it very soon. Can you tell me how much is in the budget, the current budget that's being proposed, to move this rail project forward?
I'm assuming the implication of your question is that you think we have a lousy bus system, and so is there a counterpart to putting rail on top of a city that has an inadequate bus system? Yes. Okay. I don't know of any. And I would just have to beg to differ about a lousy bus system. I mean, to me, what people ask for is more public transportation. That always comes up in polls, is that we want more public transportation to go to more places. Capital Metro is efficiently run. It's a function of the resources available to Capital Metro to serve a city of this size. So I think, I have trouble with that part of it. But then also what I would say is that this is, the urban rail is, it only fits in as a regional rail system, and you have to understand the regional rail plans. The red line, the same line that we operate on now that Capital Metro owns, also goes out to Manor and Elgin. There is an abandoned right-of-way that runs from northern Travis County basically down through Pflugerville and comes in through East Austin and then could hook up with the rail as well. Then we've got plans to build a rail system that would start in Georgetown and finish in San Antonio. So all of those, when people move into a central city on rail, they need to be able to get around once they're there, and that's what the urban rail bit does. You have to view it as a system. It is not, and it's sort of what Bill said, you can't take a given piece of roadway and analyze that by itself without looking at its connectivity to a whole system. We have to build out this whole system for the sake of the future of the region.
Bill?
Let me tail off of what John said, and then I'll answer your question. At one point, Jim Skaggs said that the city of Austin, the Capital Metro was, agreed with you, as a mediocre bus system. Regardless of where you scale, what adjectives you use, it's still true that the Capital Metro moves more people to work and back than any other bus system or any other bus and train system in Texas. 4.99% of people get to work and back on the bus and the train in Austin. That's not true anyplace else in Texas. So maybe it's mediocre, but it's the best we got, and I think we're doing actually relatively well compared to the rest of Texas. I don't know the answer to your other question. I don't know how much money we're spending on talking about planning for rail. I do know, however, that the vast majority of money we spend on transportation is to support our road network. We're spending millions of dollars every year on resurfacing streets, on planning and building new streets. That's where most of our transportation money is going. And if you want to know the exact amount that we've been spending over the last year to plan rail, Mr. Gordon Durr here from the city of Austin can tell you later on. I just don't know that number.
Let's see a show of hands here so I can figure out who to give the next question to. Who wants to ask a question? Oh, keep them up, okay? If you are a person who feels that they like rail, add another hand. You, sir.
This is a good evening.
No speeches now. Let's just ask questions.
No speeches. One thing I will tell you right up front is that you spoke of fairness and you spoke of equity. Well, there's several communities right now that are not being served, and that's Manor and Elgin. Those communities deserve rail, and they deserve to be built out before you deal with this right now. Those communities are growing, and they're growing at a pretty rapid rate. My next question is, or my next comment is I am a railroad professional. I've been doing this for 25 years.
Need to hear a question here.
All right, here's my question. What are you going to do about providing the equity and about providing the fairness? Instead of building this system out, why not take a look at building out Manor and Elgin first and working on an actual real commuter line that would actually connect the airport, that would actually connect Manor and Elgin and Leander, instead of building this? it would be cheaper, it would be more effective. and it
Okay,
would
now
be
we're in
more of a
speech
return.
territory. I think we got the question.
Yeah, and what I'd say is that, really what determines, we should put forward the whole system, by the way, and the phasing of the system. Probably won't have how it would be paid for, but I think the phasing and the entire system should be put before the public, before they're asked to vote on any given piece of it. Ridership is what would determine when you build the certain phases. So we need to know what the ridership estimates are for those, but I can tell you with a fairly high degree of certainty is that the urban rail would have higher cost effectiveness based on the ridership today than would the Manor and Elgin line. It's cheap, but the ridership would be low. But there is no question that in the future, Manor and Elgin should be served by commuter rail, and I absolutely see that day coming.
Do you guys want to respond? That microphone is working now, I'm told.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes, what did I respond to?
Then I guess
no,
not.
I have a comment.
Oh,
I have a
okay.
comment. It kind of applies, but it applies a past comment. The subject of cost effectiveness, which we've mentioned several times. I have not seen them all, obviously, but I've seen many, many, many of the presentations given to the city by its transportation department, and in not one single case have I ever seen a presentation that had the words cost effectiveness or any analysis of cost effectiveness in it. So that's one. Cap Metro, by the way, their train would be less polluting if they would close it down and put everybody in cars, because it is a diesel engine, and that few riders pollute more per person than people driving in cars by themselves. Now, we're not going to solve John's problem of non-attainment with that kind of solution.
Another question? Let me see the hands here. We've had two antis, for want of a better word. Can I see two hands from a pro? Way back there, the man in maroon. Wait for the mic.
Every city that builds rail has a certain period of growing pains where the city has not adjusted to the rail system. The rail system is not built out enough to really be effective. And everybody's complaining like heck about it, and I've been in several such cities. For the supporters, how long do you expect the period of growing pains to be for Austin?
One of the things that you find out about the road world is that once you build a freeway, it fills up very, very quickly. People at Cal Berkeley did a study and found that nationwide, within 4 years after you've built additional capacity onto the road network, it's 90% filled to capacity. It takes a little longer to fill up a train system because land uses have to adjust to it, and they're less flexible than people in their cars. On the other hand, in the places where I've seen trains come in, and Washington is my favorite example because I lived there for 7 years and I know it real well. If you compare what land uses there were inside the district in the 1970s before the metro was put in, and the same land uses and the same plots now, you find a tremendous amount of filling. The district, when I first moved into Washington in 1978, there were parts of the district close to downtown, between the White House and Georgetown, which were a ghost town, which were a wasteland, that were full of graffiti and burned out buildings. That's unthinkable now, in large part because it is so much easier to get into and out of the district, because the district is so much more valuable land, because that's where all the action is, that you don't see that sort of thing at all in Washington. Washington is now filled in a lot. That's contributed dramatically to the increase in incomes and the reduction in unemployment rate, to the point where Washington, D.C. is now the most, has one of the lowest unemployment rates of any city in the United States. One of the reasons why this is true, well, okay, you can argue about the federal government all you want to, but the vast majority of those new jobs are not federal jobs. They're private sector jobs which were placed in the district, not in the outlying areas, because that's where the most valuable land is. That's where it makes most sense for people to do business, in large part because of that train system. It's going to take a while before we adjust, and I don't have a real answer to your question, sir, except that over the course of a 10 or 20-year period, we're going to develop transit-oriented developments. We're going to fill in the areas around those stations. We're going to see denser development, more jobs around those stations, and we're going to see more and more ridership on that train system.
Man in green there, I've seen your hand several times.
I want to go back to a question that Gerald was asking, and I don't think it was ever answered. And it has to do with the percentage of ridership. Before this light rail that we have right now was built, they promised...
The actual number was 1,700 to 2,000 boardings a day initially, and within 10 or 12 years, I believe, once the system had built out, they were talking about 17,000. But initially, they were talking 1,700 to 2,000 boardings a day.
Okay, regardless of cost, and there's no solutions yet to 1.3 billion, regardless of cost, help me understand why you would vote for something that only 1% of the population would ever use. God forbid this was a food crisis and we came up with the best food in the world, but 99% of the people aren't going to eat the stuff because it tastes horrible. How can you vote for that?
Yeah, so one is you can't, that's very disingenuous to say that it's only 1% of the trips. One, that's not accurate, and two, that transit doesn't go everywhere. You can't, the road network goes everywhere, transit doesn't. You can never hold it to that standard, and it can't go everywhere with the current resources that it has. One of the things you have to do is change your land use patterns to make mass transit work. You need the mass around the transit. That is a tougher row to hoe. And so let me ask you in response, where, and this is a rhetorical question, not you in person, but what roadways, the only road capacity you can add, nothing on I-35. Nothing. You can maybe do something to switch a general purpose lane to a managed lane. MOPAC, maybe you can squeeze in another managed tolled lane, maybe you can't. What are you going to do to add capacity? And let me say, rail adds capacity to a city street. All you have to think about is a single occupancy vehicle has 4 seats, its own engine, and a trunk for one person. A rail has about that much of an aisle and about that much of an engine for each person that it's moving, and then 1 seat. That's how you get more capacity out of an existing road system. So it's not to say we need to do a bunch more on the roadside when we're restricted in that regard. We ought to do everything that we can do. And there will be some growth along State Highway 130, but we are very limited in that respect.
As he said, it was a rhetorical question. Well, I'll go ahead real quick, and then we'll let them answer as well.
I'm sitting on MOPAC in my Toyota Avalon that seats 5. The car in front of me, another Toyota Avalon seats 5, that's 10. That same lane, you put a bus there that will seat 40, and now you've increased your capacity without having to build any more roads. So I don't know how many buses 1.3 billion will buy, but I think it's a lot. So maybe for a fraction of that, you buy more buses, you do what San Antonio does, and solve the damn problem.
So, is there a response?
Ben, I would like to at least address something that John has said several times, and it is easy to compare or to say, where would you put another lane on I-35? Where would you put another lane on MOPAC, perhaps, a managed lane? Folks, there are so many places in this community that if we would take the dollars and apply it to where we know that we would get bang for the buck. We built a $750 million airport and then tried to figure out how to build the damn road to it. We are now finishing I-35 and Ben White after 12 years of the highway or of the airport. We have a 1 lane that takes you from I-35 to 183 going north. Austin is the only place that I know that builds partial loops. I mean, what an idiotic thing. And the reason is because we've never taken the dollars that we know that we absolutely need. Does anybody question whether or not we need to have a managed lane down MOPAC? Probably, except for the fact that people don't want a managed lane because it is a toll lane. What would you do with 360 on the west side? There's all sorts of places that you can take. Now, I-35, got you. It is really, really expensive, to do that. But there are places that if we would take the limited dollars that we have and apply could we do something with 5th and 6th Street coming in and out of downtown? I mean, you know, you can do that. It is an engineering deal. It takes some dollars, but I will guarantee you there are more people that go through those two intersections that will ride public transit from now to the coming. I mean, and that's in one day. So you can
The second coming, I was going to ask a follow-up. When will that, well, okay. The sir, yeah, good point.
My question is, why are we continuing to apply old technology to these problems? We've got trains that have been around since the 1800s. We went away from trains to cars for the convenience. Now we're trying to go back to trains. If we had a magic train and it took you from point A to point B, when you got to point B, unless you can walk to where you're going to need to get in a car. So it's not solving the problem. There's a group but I have a question, and the question is, there's a company that has solved the problem. They've been reaching out to people throughout Austin and the DOT federally, and it is a dual mode solution which allows cars to connect to a rail system as well as a bus connected to a rail system. It's not only efficient, it's profitable. It pays for itself, and it solves all these issues.
Are you wanting to sell this to Mr. Spellman? Or
the bottom line, you can check it out.
What is your question, sir? We really need a question.
The point is, why are we applying a solution that works versus a solution that does not work, and it pays for itself? Something that pays for itself is obviously going to work. It's going to continue.
Just so I can clarify, are you talking about a cellular mass transit system?
And it's
okay.
We can't design systems tonight.
Thank you. Bill, do you want to take a shot at that?
I have a long-standing practice of never being the first person to do anything. And if somebody else, if Pittsburgh or Atlanta or someplace else wants to try one of these things out and prove that actually all those claims that you just made are true, I'd love to see it.
Okay.
But until somebody else does it, I'd rather have somebody else do it first.
Lady in green, and then after that I'm going to get a two-handed question. Yes.
My question is information. I want to know why...
Oh, wait. Let's...
My question is, why is the city of Austin funding this instead of Capital Metro, which we divided away from the city a number of years ago?
Simple question.
It seems to me that that makes a lot more sense than the city council spending tax dollars when they're getting ready to raise the tax rate for taxpayers, even though our home values have gone down.
John, why don't you take that question?
Yeah. I mean, the answer is simple in that we don't have the resources to build it.
Thank you. I knew that was the answer, but I wanted to hear you say that you don't have the money.
Yeah, no, and I would tell anyone that asked that. It's absolutely true.
The city has more flexible sources of income.
So what that means is we pay higher taxes because now another entity collects taxes to pay for a transit system that we thought we were paying for with Cap Metro. Is that correct?
Okay, do we have another question from a pro person? David.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I want to direct this question to John Lamore, and this gets at the question of whether rail makes more sense than bus. I want to ask if you know of any case studies in this country where rail and bus have both been used in a similar corridor, and which one then does better in terms of ridership, and also which one does better in terms of catalyzing the mixed-use development that you've talked about.
Yeah, no, thanks. Absolutely, and it's, you know, I wish I had more time to address all these things. Rail is much cheaper to operate than buses. The reason why is because you can add capacity to rail with a single driver. You can carry much more passengers in a rail car than you can in a bus. And so let's say, for instance, a typical bus carries about 40 people. One of our rail cars can go up to 200 if it's standing. It's about 110 all seated. One driver. To have those buses, you would need 4 buses to do the same thing. So and if you look at, these are from DART. DART does all their own analysis. Their subsidy per passenger on their bus system is $5.10. For their light rail system, it's $4.21. That is a fact. The same thing in Denver. Denver, with all of their Fast Tracks program, did an analysis of light rail relative to bus, and the light rail is always cheaper to operate. It's everywhere across the country. That is a known fact within the transit industry. Secondly, buses, if they don't have their dedicated lane, they sit in congestion. One of the big advantages of rail is that you know exactly when you're going to start and when you are going to arrive. It is not affected by congestion. That is a huge advantage for rail transit, particularly as our roadways become increasingly congested, which they are absolutely destined to do given our growing population. It is inevitable, folks, and you can always add more cars to a rail system. We have to realize that we are a growing region, and that is not going to stop. And then the thing about the land use, roadways do not alter land use patterns for the better. They don't. Limited access rail systems do. And just for instance, one fact that in Portland, more than $3.8 billion in development within walking of the light rail system since its formation. In DART, $4.26 billion of additional development around its rail system, all with a much more sustainable pattern of development. Roadways do not do that. They have their place, but they are certainly not a panacea, and we have to do more than just build roads.
A response?
I cannot believe that I just heard that the rail costs less.
Is that on?
That the rail costs less. The rail went from $2 million yearly operation to $12 million. And let me tell you something else that happened. The people that were supposed to be taking the rail in Leander, when we were sold on the fact that we will take the rail out to Leander, guess what? We can stop the buses because people will then become the rail riders. Within 6 months, the bus riders started complaining so much because the rail cost them more money, took them longer to get there, so then they started squawking to this board to say, put the buses back into operation, and that's exactly what they did. Now, that is the truth that happened out there, is it not, John? Thank you very much.
Well, no, let me make one point about that, in that the numbers I'm quoting, by the way, are a mature rail system. I will not deny we are spending $10 million a year in operating the Red Line with 2,000 boardings, and it'll go up. It is hard to defend that by itself. There is no doubt about it that that is a starter line that you can't, with that level of ridership, you can't make those numbers work. But you get a mature system with high ridership, and absolutely it is more cost effective to operate than is a bus system. It is just a standard, well-known fact within the industry. And to say otherwise is just absolutely incorrect. But what you have to compare is a mature system to an immature system, and ours is very immature and very basic.
I can take one more question, unless the responses are very short. I'd like to take 2. Sir, right here.
I've been hearing a lot about this notion of a regional rail system, and you're justifying the Austin urban rail system based on how it fits into this regional rail system. Can you give us a cost estimate of what this regional rail system will be?
It's not known, and it needs to be known, by the way, but I can talk about the Lone Star Rail, which runs, like I said, we're working, or like Bill said, we're working off a different time frame. We don't have all the answers. I can tell you the cost of the Lone Star Rail, which runs from Georgetown to San Antonio, is currently estimated at about $3 billion plus, but understand what that does is build an entire new rail line for the Union Pacific, which would increase the capacity and the speeds of the Union Pacific freight lines take all of that freight out of the center of San Antonio and out of the center of Austin and give them a new track, and then put the new system in place that would operate on their largely abandoned line between Georgetown and San Antonio. Don't know what it would cost to put a line out on the Mocan corridor, but it's an existing right-of-way that's preserved. The green line out to Manor and Elgin would be very inexpensive per passenger mile. All we'd have to do is upgrade an existing line. And the other major piece, with the Round Rock one, they did some estimates on that, and I forgot what the cost of those were. But that needs to be known, and you know, the public deserves an answer to that question. I'm with you 100%.
Sinclair?
Okay. Is this on?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, it's a question. If not now, when? The whole discussion tonight, it seems to me, the underlying theme is when do you start? How fast does it become, quote, mature? There was a time about 15 years ago when 1,700 people rode the rails in Portland. Today, it's 144,000 plus per day, or 123,000 per day, or 1,440,000 per year. And now they are extremely jealous of the city of Stuttgart in Germany, which made the decision at the end of the Second World War. They have 365 million boardings per day. That's 1 million. 365 million per year. That's 1 million per day.
So the question was, if not now, when?
When?
And I think maybe that's one you guys should answer first.
That's for them.
This maturity thing, this whole maturity issue is kind of baffling me. When is mature? As I just opened my 5 minutes with, I talked about the fact that in Dallas and Houston, and tick Dallas because it's had rail running for many years, a study was done recently on each of their rail stations, and fewer people are served today in each of their rail stations than the year they opened. So they're going downhill. While Dallas is one of the fastest growing cities in the nation, Houston's going downhill. They're dropping like a rock in ridership, and yet it's one of the fastest growing cities in the nation. Austin is one of the fastest growing cities in the nation, if not one or two, and its ridership is dropping. So when is mature? How many years? And how? The answer to rail support is always the same. Allow me to build some more, and you'll see better results. And it never happens. It never happens. So.
Okay, now we're going to give each one of them 2 minutes, and I know 2 minutes is very short, but and we're going to go in reverse alphabetical order, so Bill's first.
Messrs. Skaggs and Doherty have told you that no train ever makes sense in any city in the country. They just basically said trains are a stupid idea, we should stop them. In New York City, Washington, D.C., Boston, San Francisco, Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Pittsburgh, and Seattle, 25% or more of people take a train or a bus to work. That's how they get to work. They don't get in a car and drive. Now, in Austin, Texas, it's only 5%. One of the reasons why our traffic is as congested as it is in peak hours, that's the time when we're all worried about getting to work and back. It's the time where our traffic congestion is at its worst, and that's the problem that they would like to solve and that we would like to solve. During that period, 95% of people are in a single occupancy vehicle with 3 seats empty and 1 seat occupied by the driver getting to work. If we could convert that 5% to 20 or 25%, as many other cities our size or smaller, some of them, have been able to do, then we could get a lot of those cars off of I-35, off of Mopac 290, 183, and enjoy a faster commute if you choose to take a car. More important, we're giving ourselves, our kids, our grandkids a choice. Right now, they don't have a choice. They want to get to work, they want to go to school, they want to go to soccer practice. We're going to have to drive them. That's the only choice we got. We need to give people a choice, And a train is, for better or worse, the best choice we've got to be able to change this pattern.
Jim?
Well, contrary to what Bill just said, there is no city in the nation outside of New York that has more than 50%, or it's like 40% of the people riding trains. The second largest number, to work I'm talking, the second largest number is 14% in Washington, D.C., and it goes down from there. We are not going to be like a pre-automobile city, ever. Nor are many other cities going to be like that in the future. So we can't base our future on their past. I will read again, and I think all of these are proven by extensive studies and evaluations. The proposal is not funded, and there's no plan for funding it viable. There are no partners that are viable. The rail would would result in long-term tax increases, significant tax increases. Public transit has a long-term declining trend. I say again, it's going downhill in almost every major city in Texas. So why would we put in a system that is proven to go downhill? It is mature in those cities. Social equity and justice will be terribly devastated because you will siphon money away from the bus systems, which no matter how many trains you have in a city, even in Portland, the Mecca, they have more people riding buses than trains. And so when you take money from the bus system and you cannibalize the bus system, guess who suffers? The low income. And that's what happens in every city, city after city. Other essential services, as Gerald mentioned early on, and this is really key, you can't waste billions doing something that is ineffective and not affect your ability to do things that make sense for a community. And we have a lot of things that make sense, high priority, essential items, and we must spend the money bang for the buck, to use Gerald's term.
John?
You know, Gerald and Jim tell you that they don't want rail. They would take every single penny away from public transportation and put it into roadways. Gerald said that. They are not advocating for increased public transportation, which is a critical component of a compassionate society in a number of different ways. So they are not, do not be fooled by saying that not spending money on rail improves public transportation. That is not what they're advocating. I entirely disagree with their assessment of the cost effectiveness of public transportation. I just completely disagree with it based on the facts at almost every level. I want more money for roadways. I absolutely do. I have advocated for that for 8 years, very actively. It is a critical component of reducing congestion and improving mobility within Central Texas. However, it is far from a panacea and is certainly not the entire answer. So what you have never heard from them is their vision for the region. What is their vision for the region? What do they want Central Texas to look like 20, 30, and 40 years from now? My vision for the region is where public transportation is a viable means for everyone to get around. Where people lose their right to drive an automobile, they have a viable alternative. They are not left to rot in their apartment because they can't walk to some place, to a meaningful destination, or because they don't have another alternative to use in terms of transportation. Rail transit absolutely shapes land uses. Roadways do not. There is no denying that, and that is something, it is a longer-term fix for the things that plague Central Texas, but it is something that we have to pursue, and rail is what does that, and it does it cost-effectively.
Gerald?
Isn't this special? First of all, John, I have never said that I was opposed to public transportation. Were you here in 1985? I was here in 1985. I voted for the creation of Capital Metro in 1985. What I have said is that I think that we deserve another opportunity to reallocate, to have the opportunity to reallocate the penny sales tax. And if I were the king and I could say, this is what the language would be, it would be something as simple as this. If you think, this is a little David Dewhurst, if you think that we've gotten what you thought you were going to get, then reinstate them at the penny. But if you don't think that we've gotten, then give us the opportunity and take public transit to a half a penny and take a half a penny and use it to build out a comprehensive road system for 10 years, then come back and allow people to vote again, because I might vote for rail in 10 years if we could finish building a comprehensive road system. But I have never said that I would take all the public transit dollars, and that is absolutely the farthest thing from the truth. Everybody in this room knows how important public transportation is. It absolutely is a necessity for a community. But we are just looking for something that's practical, people. We have not built our comprehensive road system, which 95% of us elect to do. I bet neither of you came over here in public transit tonight, and you could have come public transit if you'd have wanted to. But that's not how we get around, unfortunately. If I wake up tomorrow and ridership goes to 65% of the people in the community, then fine, then let's start changing some things. But history is telling us what we're doing. We continue to get in our cars, albeit it is a real pain. I mean, I don't know what you have to do in L.A. I mean, L.A. is a pretty bad city. I mean, but you have just as much car issue problems as you do anywhere else. But folks, all we're saying is, and thank you for coming tonight, because, I mean, this takes me back to the 8 years that I was on the Commissioner's Court, where it's like, God dog, folks, I mean, even if you're opposed to me, thank you for coming out and being involved and for caring enough to come and listen to this. If we've changed your opinion either way, well, thank you for that. But be careful going home tonight, and I'm sure this won't be the last discussion we get to have about this. Thank you.
Yeah, let's give all the panelists a hand. Folks, before you go, I do want to say I really do thank them. This can't be a pleasant way to spend a Tuesday night, seriously. And I thank you all for coming out. Now, bear in mind, this was live streamed on statesman.com tonight. A shorter version of it is going to be on statesman.com in the coming days. And sometime in the next week or two, it'll be on our Sunday forum in an edited version. So for those that didn't have a chance to be here tonight, there will be other opportunities to benefit from this.
And on behalf of the Community Relations Council here at the Dell Jewish Community Campus and the Center for Politics and Governance, where I am at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, and of course the Austin American-Statesman, we want to thank all of you for being here, for contributing. Even if you didn't have a chance or wish to speak, you contributed by being here, and I think that this type of civic engagement is so important to our community. And we look forward to seeing you here in the future as we have collaborations in the future. Thank you very much, and good evening.
Good job, man.